This is a special edition of The Beat because we are tracking this growing Ukraine scandal and the impeachment probe. And we begin with another sign that this one is different. What a difference one weekend makes. You know, Americans went home Friday with Trump's White House in a kind of a free fall over those explosive allegations that had uncorked this impeachment scandal, all from one whistleblower. And now, this week begins with two whistleblowers. Lawyers now saying this new insider is coming forward with firsthand knowledge of that infamous Ukraine call, and that President Trump's not taking the pressure well, lashing out as the House issues more subpoenas, including new ones today, demanding documents from the Budget Office and the Pentagon. That's a high-stakes battle. 5 different Trump administration departments now face these deadlines to comply. And another sign of the escalating stakes in this impeachment battle, the Washington Post reporting late today, House Democrats now exploring extra security measures to protect the whistleblower when any testimony might be provided. Democrats, quote, considering testimony at a remote location, possibly obscuring the individual's appearance and voice, which the Post describes as, quote, extraordinary moves to prevent Trump's congressional allies from revealing the identity of that whistleblower. Now, just stop and take that in. It is illegal to expose the identity of that whistleblower. It is illegal because of laws that the Congress writes. So this report is stating that at least Democratic officials believe there's a credible concern that the people who write these laws, in this case, they're alleging House Republicans, will literally break them to continue a cover-up for Donald Trump. Now, that is a serious concern or allegation. But then again, Donald Trump himself has been calling for exactly that outcome. And the lawyer for one whistleblower is also warning today that there is now an alleged $50,000 bounty out there for revealing his client's identity. The sparring comes as top House Republican Kevin McCarthy appears, I don't know how else to say it, appears to own himself with this patently false defense.
You watch what the president said. He's not saying China's investigating.
Likewise, China should start an investigation into the Bidens, because what happened in China is just about as bad as what happened with Ukraine.
The fact checks are pretty straightforward when the lies are this blatant. And that's not the president's only problem in this news cycle right now, because his congressional defenders can keep denying that Trump requested foreign collusion against his rivals. But now Trump's own advisor, Rudy Giuliani, is again admitting it. This is the kind of damage control that requires damage control.
The president of the United States has every right to ask countries to help us in a criminal investigation that should be undertaken.
That happens to involve a political opponent.
Well, I can't help that. Well, first of all, even if it is pressuring Ukraine, it's a lot different than when Biden did. This all should have stopped when President Trump said, I didn't do anything wrong.
Now, that is a view from a Trump loyalist. But there's another sign, and this one is about why this is different. It comes from the drumbeat at Fox News, of course, a major source for conservatives, which is now airing more and more concerns about Donald Trump amidst this scandal and beyond.
We're hardly a channel in agreement. We have a few resistance people on this channel. We're going to be honest.
It seems to me to be an effort by the president's defenders to try to make something, to make nothing out of something. And there is something here.
Your diligence, your dedication, and you just kept on with those questions the other day with the president. You were cool. You were collected.
Today, the president did exactly what he's accused of doing, this time on live television.
Asking for aid in a domestic political campaign, whether the aid is delivered or not, is a criminal event. That's clear in the statute.
Criminal event, clear in the statute. So no matter where people are getting their news, it is now a fact of American life that a lot of people are getting news about the evidence of Donald Trump doing something wrong. And whatever the public's take, that debate is not the only place that this battle is unfolding. The impeachment probe itself grinding on. Tomorrow, lawmakers questioning a Trump official at the center of those leaked incriminating text messages about the Ukraine plot, Ambassador Gordon Sondland. So we have a lot to get to. I want to bring into our special coverage right now former federal prosecutor Barrett Berger, Ken Friedman, who worked for Rudy Giuliani's 1993 campaign for mayor, and today has this barn burner in the New York Times making waves around the country. Quote, what happened to Rudy Giuliani, where he writes, the man I worked for in 1993 is not the man who lies for Donald Trump. and goes on to issue many other criticisms we're going to get to. And we're joined by a Republican, Christine Todd Whitman, who served as governor of New Jersey and the EPA chief in the Bush administration, and has emerged as a voice concerned about some of what Donald Trump is doing. Good evening to all of you.
Good evening.
Barrett, new whistleblower, alleging firsthand accounts. How does that change this?
Yeah, I think it's significant. I mean, look, we have to remember that it's not a court of law here. For an impeachment inquiry, it's not necessary that a whistleblower has firsthand information. We have to remember they are trying to make the case both for members of Congress and ultimately for the general public. And so assuming this person does in fact have firsthand knowledge, that only makes the case stronger. I think perhaps this person's greatest utility, though, at this stage is to provide more evidence for the members of Congress to use when they're questioning people in these upcoming hearings. If they're able to interview this second whistleblower, in addition to the first whistleblower, they can get a better sense of how to both question and possibly cross-examine witnesses that come before them and what other avenues to seek with subpoenas and document requests.
Yeah, and Governor Whitman, I'm curious what you think, and I want to play some sound from an old school Lindsey Graham. You remember the... You know how Kanye West talks about how there's old Kanye and new Kanye, and there's a lot of people who prefer old Kanye. There's a little bit of a version of that with Lindsey Graham. One of the points he made there that it could be relevant in this impeachment is not only what does the whistleblowers have, but whether there is obstruction from the White House over something that is so central. Lindsey Graham's view used to be that level of obstruction changes the game. Take a look.
The day Richard Nixon failed to answer that subpoena is the day that he was subject to impeachment because he took the power from Congress.
Well, I mean, it's mind-boggling to me that Congress isn't standing up now and saying, this is about the Constitution. This is about the three branches of government. This is about our role as the legislative branch. I would think that they would be outraged at the amount of stonewalling that's been going on, and that they wouldn't see this as being undermining the very premise of our government and our Constitution. And it's, it's enormously troubling. I don't get it. I do. I mean, from a political point of view, I guess, but we've so slipped into this mindset that everything is about politics and nothing's about policy anymore. And we are so divided that people are going to stand up. And when the president, how can he deny that he asked China to interfere when he asked China to intervene?
Does it concern you when you see this new Washington Post report out tonight that there is a credible concern that members of Congress would break the law and leak the whistleblower's identity?
I'm very concerned about that kind of thing. We have seen all the basic norms that we have come to expect be blown away over the last 2.5 years, 3 years. It seems like an eternity, but I guess it's only 3 at this point. And that has been something that is going to have a long-term damage, I believe, to the people's confidence in government.
Barrett, take a look at some of the other defenses we are seeing in this struggle among Republicans to find something to say.
Well, I doubt if the China comment was serious, to tell you the truth.
I don't know if that's a real request or him just needling the press, knowing that you guys were going to get outraged by it.
George, you really think he was serious about thinking that China's going to investigate the Biden family? Because I don't think that's what he did.
Legally, how strong an argument is that?
I mean, this is actually something you see criminal defendants trying to do all the time in our courtrooms. If you have a recording where their voice is on it, they say, sure, I said those words, but that wasn't what I meant. Whether it's I wasn't really talking about drugs, I was really talking about our code, or I was really just joking when I asked a foreign government to help interfere in our elections. I think if you're captured on tape, that's sort of the only thing that is left for you to claim. But at least based on my experience in federal court, it was not often very successful.
Yeah, and it goes to desperation. Ken, as promised, I bring you in. You were making waves with this piece today. Just as a little background, yes or no, you advocated for the election of Rudy Giuliani as mayor.
I did. I was his press secretary.
And you advocated and defended him throughout his tenure.
I did.
And as recently as last year, you talked about your respect for him.
Right, in the Daily News.
Yeah. And I think, as someone who covers this and interviews people, being able to change your mind in public is more difficult than even doing it in private. Something changed for you. You have this new piece in the New York Times today. Tell us about it.
Well, there was an old Rudy and a new Rudy. as there tend to be in politics. And I think you knew the old Rudy
Yes,
as well,
I did.
right? And the old Rudy listened because he wanted to win. The new Rudy doesn't listen anymore because he won, and you can't tell him anything he doesn't know. I don't think, as many people think, he's unhinged or suffering from dementia. I think that he is zealously trying to protect his golden goose, frankly, the president.
But you write that he's a lying, bumbling henchman.
Yeah, he's not doing a good job of protecting the golden goose. It's clear that he's not telling the truth, and it's clear that he is fumbling and bumbling in his attempts to do that.
Did he used to lie this routinely, in your view?
No. He was very good at message discipline and control back in the day.
Well, you mentioned that back in the day, message discipline. Let's look at his message whatever on Fox News yesterday.
There's no claim even in the lawsuit that Joe Biden
you
knew
can't
about
be
this.
that naive.
No.
20 years of a Washington press corps that was, I'd say, brother, cut it out, damn it. As opposed to, I don't know about it. I didn't hear it. And you all buy that. Bull. So in charge of Ukraine. They make $5 million.
I got a hard break
China.
coming up. You have the transcript of the call.
I know you want to defend it so bad.
I don't want to defend anything. I'm asking questions.
You do.
I am asking
it's pathetic.
questions.
Unfortunately, it looks like a right-wing conspiracy nut. Okay, but when you're
you're the former press secretary to the Giuliani campaign. You're saying he looks like a nut.
That's what he looks like. All right, but when your client lies and you cash the check, in this case, he's working pro bono, but he's profiting.
Paul Manafort worked pro bono as well. Sometimes it's considered suspicious.
All right, if your client lies, you have to lie for him. I mean, look at Sean Spicer. He tried to convince us that the Obama inauguration was half the size of the Trump inauguration. Okay,
you seem pained. Does this pain you?
Of course it pains me. He married us 25 years ago tomorrow. So I'm very fond of him. I have very fond memories. I actually carry this in my wallet, as I mentioned in the Times.
Yeah, I read it in the article.
Yeah.
I didn't know you had it with you.
Yeah.
This is what?
That's our wedding day at City Hall. And I carried it in my wallet until recently, when I couldn't carry it anymore, when someone at a dinner party, a stranger, suggested that we weren't legally married because Rudy's working on his third divorce. So it impacted me. That actually had an emotional and psychological effect.
And there's someone who works, and I say this sometimes when people ask me, well, how can you have this or that person on the show or interview this or that person? In my experience, a lot of the people who go into government and public service, they may have a range of views, but a lot of them have a great belief in public service. I imagine, in your view, you would say that animated you. And so what is it that you're hoping to achieve by speaking out, which I see is not easy for you, when you see Rudy Giuliani defending what the president is inviting foreign governments to do now?
I actually hope that he still can be reached, that maybe he's watching tonight, and hopefully he read the New York Times, and he'll pause and he'll think about the zealous way that he is defending him, the ferocious way that he is defending him.
And Barrett, I want to bring you in on this because obviously members of the bar work cases. There are people who are prosecutors. They go into defense and vice versa. But as Rudy himself has recently admitted, this is not just him taking on a defense or a criminal case. He now stands in the intersection of something that Congress is investigating as unconstitutional, as an abuse of power. So he is the agent of that plot and not merely a criminal defense attorney, because I will go on record, anyone has the right to counsel. And so there is something extra concerning to people who know that. You worked in SDNY. When you contrast the role he used to play as someone who busted criminal conspiracies, take a look at that older Rudy, as our panelists have called it.
I am tired of being asked over and over again, which type of crime is more dangerous, violent crime or white-collar crime? All are dangerous and destructive of our society.
I think 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, nobody would have believed it was possible to convict the head of the Sicilian Mafia and have him sitting in the Metropolitan Correction Center.
Yeah, I mean, I want to just jump in on one thing that you said, which is, you know, that you lie. If you're a lawyer, you lie on behalf of your client. But I want to just, for point of clarification, you know, just because lawyers may have that reputation in the media does not mean that that is an acceptable practice. There are ethical rules that guide our practice.
Hold on, Barrett. You are a lawyer. How can we believe you?
I know. How dare I, right?
It's a paradox.
Defense lawyers know when they have a guilty client, though, don't they?
They usually do, although I would argue most
depends on the case.
Right.
Well, yes.
Right, and everybody has the right to a vigorous defense and to an advocate that will oftentimes take positions that they may know are weak. What I don't think they have the right to is a lawyer that will go into court and lie for them. Not only is that illegal, but it is also unethical and is contrary to sort of our rules of professional responsibility.
And Governor, the court setting that this may be heading towards, if the House impeaches, is a Senate trial, which, as the country will be reminded, is different than normal court. But I wonder what you think, looking at broadening from Rudy Giuliani as this individual that we're learning about, to the choices facing the Republican Party. Is it possible for the Republican Party to defend the president and the incumbent party if they wish, while also being truthful, or while also acknowledging there are things that he shouldn't do, while standing up to that? Do you see any hope for that in your colleagues?
I do. I hope that eventually they will see the importance of this to the future of the country and treating these things as real issues. I think a lot is going to depend on how the Democrats handle this. They really need to find some there. I've spent time now talking to people who are, you know, this way. They don't love everything about Trump, but they want to hear more. And they don't believe there's a there yet. I think there's plenty there, but they're not convinced. And so lots going to depend on how methodical and transparent the Democrats are as they go forward. I wish there was only one committee instead of 5 doing this, because then you've got subpoenas all over the place, and it just feeds into this. They're beating up on the poor man. You know, he kind of feeds all of this. He called for this when he called out and said publicly that that China should look in. We've already done Russia should look in, but when China should start to investigate, you can't deny it. And the damage he's done to Ukraine, I was just there for the last elections, their parliamentary elections, and the people were so enthusiastic about the potential of Zelensky, who is someone who is young, unexperienced, but is coming in with I'm going to tackle the corruption, which has been endemic. And then our president gets up there and sucks him into this domestic political thing, is undermining him. He keeps talking about how corrupt Ukraine is. It's basically Putin's talking points. Yeah, it's damning the way you put it, and the evidence shows the president bringing in not only the foreign leaders, but his own attorney general, Rudy Giuliani, and others, Pence perhaps, into this whole plot. So there's a lot, as you say, to be uncovered. Actually, Rick Perry did it, I think. I heard that. It is, Rick Perry. We have more on that later. Thank you for that fact check. We can mix in the very serious times for our Republic with some sense of humorous perspective. And I'll remind viewers what we've been listening to in this very sober and serious conversation is a former Giuliani aide, a Republican governor in good standing, and a prosecutor. Not exactly a resistance panel when it comes to just assessing the facts of what is arrayed against this president. Christine, Todd, Whitman, Barrett Berger, and Ken Friedman. Thanks to each of you. Thank you. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.